thing I have to talk about is the Dachau concentration camp. When we were in England, my men really didn't understand why they were there, and they kept saying so. They didn't understand why we were in, why they had to be involved in this war, and they didn't mind saying so. I didn't have an opportunity to try to talk with them about it, except maybe 2 or 3 of them at a time. But at any rate, we were all too busy to get involved in the education process, which probably the Army should have done, but didn't. So they complained, why are we here? Why don't we go home? What are we doing here? England, same thing. France, the same thing. Germany, the same thing, until we got to Dachau. The way we approached Dachau, and the way we didn't know what Dachau was. We saw on the map that there was a village of Dachau, but we didn't know what it was. We were on a straight, narrow road, and I was in the front with my command car, and we're driving down that road, and we started to smell the sickening, sweet smell of decayed bodies, death. And we realized that we were coming to something, and we didn't know what it was. We looked down the road, and there was a lone man driving a horse and wagon. And as he approached us, the smell got worse. When he got to us, I had Charlie Weiss, my interpreter, who had been born in Vienna, stop him and ask him what was on the back of his flat-top wagon. We could see what it was, but Charlie asked him. It was bodies, emaciated, disgusting bodies. And he said, we asked him where he lived. He said he lived in the village of Dachau. Now Dachau was, I think, about 3 miles from the camp known as Dachau.
Concentration.
And he said he didn't know anything about what was going on in the concentration camp. Of course, they all didn't know. And I felt like beating the man senseless, but we didn't molest him.
Did you have any clue at the time that what had gone on?
No.
Nothing?
But when we continued down the road, we noticed the smell got worse. And we came to the concentration camp. And Patton his whole group was sitting off to the side, to our right. And he had one of his officers call out to us, General Patton wants you to get off the road right away. Get off the road. We want our tanks to go through and you're blocking us. So we, of course, got off the road. And now we were almost opposite the concentration camp. And we saw the sights there that I don't think any of my men, would ever forget. It was everything you've seen in movies, everything you've seen in pictures. It was terrible. And the men were still in there striped uniforms, and they were holding their hands out. And one of the mistakes, and we were told, don't give them anything to eat. They haven't eaten. Don't give them anything to eat, because they can get sick and they can die. That's what one of the officers told us. So we weren't allowed to get near them anyway. We were kept a distance away from them. But my men saw this. And never again did I ever hear any man in my unit say, why are we here? They all knew why we were there. And there were incidents which I'm not going to describe now that happened after that, which indicated the anger that these American soldiers felt by their actions for what they saw at Dachau. Of course, I was happy when the first shell was fired when we landed in France. I was just overjoyed that here we finally were doing something to attack these horrible people. To me, maybe wrongly, but I had no use for Germans. Funny, sort of an amusing story, we had every time we were in a position, we had to move to the next position for our howitzers. We had to reconnoiter the area to find out where we were going to go and where our positions would be. And I appointed Lieutenant Fry, a man from Texas, to be the reconnoitering officer, and he would go out with his driver and radio operator, and he would locate the next positions to us. There was an art to finding the right positions, because you wanted to have something called enfiladed positions, where since a howitzer has a high trajectory, you could locate it behind a hill, a mountain, or whatever, and it would hide the flash from the Germans, because the Germans, if they could locate your flash, they could bring artillery fire or plane attacks on the area where you were located. And Lieutenant Fry didn't know any German, so Charlie Weiss, our Viennese interpreter, taught him one sentence. Diesen Haus wird verleifert beschlagen bei das Militär Amerikanisch. Sie müssen rausgehen. And what that meant was, this house is seized by the American military, you must get out. We would not live in the same house with Germans, for obvious reasons. And Fry didn't know any more German, so he'd go into a house, he'd make this statement to them, and they'd start talking in German to him. Oh, we're poor, we have little babies. He didn't understand what the heck they were talking about. So that was a perfect setup. Fry was, he was an organizer for the Southwest Regional Oil Union, and he was an atheist and a communist.
A Texan communist?
He was an atheist and a communist, and when he got commissioned, he told me that they brought him into some FBI location. I don't know what officers were involved, what branch of the officers were, but they questioned him very extensively before they gave him his commission. He's a good guy, and he and I agreed that when the war was over, he and I would hole up into a room, we'd get a bottle of whiskey, and we'd argue out the communist position against the democratic positions. Of course, he didn't admit that communism was not democratic, but that's beside the point.
Did that ever happen?
Well, we got into a room with whiskey, but we never got much further than drinking the whiskey. I'm trying to think of something of a more of additional interest. I don't know whether I have anything. I think I've given you enough about the war.